My panel today on this, the 38th in the series, are Crossing Over the Bridge, Dr. Ervin Laszlo, Professor Ashok and Kingsley L. Dennis. Ervin Laszlo is a systems philosopher, integral theorist and classical pianist. Twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, he's authored more than 70 books, which have been translated into 19 languages, and has published in excess of 400 articles and research papers, including 6 volumes of piano recordings. He's generally recognized as the founder of systems philosophy and general evolution theory, and serves as the founder-director of the General Evolution Research Group and as past president of the International Society for the Systems Sciences. He's also the recipient of the highest degree in philosophy and human sciences from the Sorbonne, the University of Paris, as well as of the coveted Artist Diploma of the Franz Liszt Academy of Budapest. Additional prizes and awards include 4 honorary doctorates. His appointments have included research grants at Yale and Princeton universities, professorships for philosophy, systems sciences and future sciences at the universities of Houston, Portland State and Indiana, as well as the Northwestern University and the State University of New York. In 1999, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Canadian International Institute of Advanced Studies in Systems Research and Cybernetics. For many years, he's served as president of the Club of Budapest, which he founded. He's an advisor to the UNESCO Director General, ambassador of the International Delphic Council, member of both the International Academy of Science, World Academy of Arts and Science, and the International Academy of Philosophy. Ashok is professor and chair of philosophy at Haverford College in the United States. He's focused over the past 4 decades on tapping and clarifying the deeper common ground between diverse cultural, religious and ideological worlds. In his many published essays and public lectures, he's attempted to demonstrate that human reason is essentially global, dialogical, holistic, and intercultural. In his books, he's attempted to demonstrate that there is a fundamental logos, or universal grammar underlying all cultures, religions, philosophies, and ideologies. This discovery and clarification of the fundamental logos in human cultures, experience, and life has important implications for effectively addressing the most pressing practical problems humans face today. His Global Dialogue Institute has developed a powerful whole child education pilot project that has been supported by UNICEF and the Ministry of Education in Indonesia. This integral approach to education and teacher training uses the power of deep dialogue to renovate the teaching and learning ecology of education. Kingsley Dennis is a sociologist, researcher, and writer. He co-authored After the Car, which examines post-peak oil societies and mobility. He's also the author of New Consciousness for a New World, as well as The Struggle for Your Mind, Conscious Evolution, and the Battle to Control How We Think. He's also the co-editor of the New Science and Spirituality Reader, and he's worked in the sociology department at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom, and is now a visiting fellow at the Centre for Mobilities Research at the same university. He's collaborating with the New Paradigm Giordano Bruno Global Shift University, and is a co-initiator of the World Shift Movement and a co-founder of World Shift International. He's the author of numerous articles on complexity theory, social technologies, new media communications, and conscious evolution. As well as academic training, Dennis has also lived and worked for many years overseas, including 5 years in Turkey. He currently lives in Andalusia in Spain and is working on new book material today. He continues to research, write, travel, grow his own vegetables, and seeks answers to many questions. Dr. Ervin Laszlo, Professor Ashok and Kingsley L. Dennis join me today on this, the 38th in the series, A Crossing Over the Bridge. Welcome to Crossing Over the Bridge, the 38th program in the series. It's a great pleasure today to be talking to Dr. Ervin Laszlo, Professor Ashok Gangadine, and Kingsley L. Dennis. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. I had provided some notes to you, gentlemen, before the program. I'd like to start, if I may, with you, sir, Dr. Ervin Laszlo, your current impressions of the global dynamics we have today, particularly in your neck of the woods in Italy and Europe.
Well, David, first of all, I don't have a neck of the woods. I do live here, but I'm not really familiar with it that much. I don't really belong here. I haven't got roots in anywhere, perhaps as childhood roots in Hungary. So I can't say that I know very much what goes on in the mind of Italians. I can give you a general impression, but the impression is not very different from what I get from in America or anywhere in the Western world with which I'm familiar. And this impression is really that the situation is somewhat chaotic in the sense that people don't know what is happening. They don't even know whether there is a major change coming. They suspect that it is. There is a sense that either one restabilizes the current system or we may be facing serious disasters. So there is some level of fear associated with it, at least in the mainstream populations. In the better off populations, those people who have some stake in the system, they're worried about losing that stake. On the level of young people, either there is a kind of a never mind, as long as I can get along attitude, enjoy myself now, but that is waning somewhat. I think that is becoming less and less. There is an increased sense that, okay, something is happening, and that perhaps there is something one can do about it. I think there is a positive sign in terms of new cultures arising, and new cultures which are motivated by the kind of thing that you have in social networks, by the kind of thing where people are coming together and exchanging views. And this is among the more savvy, more college-minded young people, and we see that emerging, as well as among intellectuals and artists and spiritual people, of course. The mainstream, as I said, is somewhat baffled by what is happening. The sense that everything is okay as it is has vanished practically, but what is coming next is not very clear, and people don't know whether to react with fear, whether they react with trying to be entrenched in terms of maintaining their own position, or that they could look for something positive factions, positive projects, etc., to join. And I would think that this program, among others, is be one of those that where people would look to as something that will give them a handle on how to get together to do something constructive.
May I pass that question over to Ashok Gangadine as your statement and brief response to Ervin?
Well, I appreciate Ervin's perspective very much. It's clear here, I'm in the Philadelphia region, the founding of the birthplace of American democracy here in Philadelphia, teaching at Haverford College, founded by the Quakers, and the college itself, Haverford, considered one of the top 10 in the nation, is in a way an index of the level of awareness and responsivity that we're addressing here. And I think Ervin speaks well in terms of a general disconnect. There's confusion and chaos. There's a sense that things are shifting, both with these brilliant young students, young minds, as well as with faculty and the public at large. We've been holding a forum here on global philosophy and consciousness for 17 years and bringing in citizens across various disciplines and professions to the college in an ongoing dialogue. So that is also an indicator of the level of awareness. And there are local pockets of activists of all kinds, green movement and peace activists and all kinds of, and global warming issues. And all of these are in the air, true. But I think there's a general failure of having the literacy and the lens to understand what is the nature of the problem. How can we individually and collectively respond to what's before us? And this is why I agree. I echo Ervin's point that programs such as this that attempt to bring to the public awareness and public space articulate literacy to diagnose what's going on. How do we look at the vast, holistic, systemic range of crises all around us, not only environmental and political and economic and health and all levels, education. Everywhere we look in the culture, we find symptoms of an old dysfunctional way of making our worlds. That's what's happening, and yet people do not have the wherewithal, the literacy, the conceptual tools, the rationality, the educational skills to diagnose it medically, so to speak, and to respond creatively. Thank you.
Kingsley, Dennis, your response and statement, both to Ervin's comments and to Ashok's.
Yes, thank you, David. I agree with both Ervin and Ashok, and they've pointed out this general disconnect, or what Ervin has mentioned as the bafflement. However, I've been in myself living in Spain for 3 years now, and because of what's happening in Europe particularly, Spain has been quite central to this unfolding, especially the economic unfolding. And Spain, in many ways, has been very vocal, perhaps more vocal than some other European regions, in contesting what has been happening. If I can point out, for example, the rise of the Los Indignados, who organized themselves very effectively in the Plaza del Sol in Madrid to protest against the economic imbalance and instability, and many other factors as well. And this movement gained a lot of ground before, for example, the Occupy movements emerged throughout America. And this has been followed by other movements such as the Los Campesinos, which translates as the peasants, which which are localized movements who are again contesting the economic instabilities and especially how this affects food production and the resources of the food and the food network and distribution. So Spain has become quite vocal and visual in these respects. And also myself, I've noticed the change in people's attitude, especially in my region, Andalusia, that a couple of years ago when I was speaking about this, there was more of the perhaps general mainstream attitude of, well, yes, we've always had crises and this is just another one and we'll pull through type of attitude. And now it's a lot different. I think in many ways, the instabilities, and we can call it recession economically, that we've been involved with, definitely I think since late 2008, has been here and has not gone away. And now this has become a realization that has affected people more deeply, I think, over the years. And so there's a lot of anger here. I think this week, when the incumbent government they announced their recent austerity measures, we had last week, Thursday was a national day of strike, the national huelga, where the nation more or less came to a standstill, and there was very, in some ways, unfortunately, violent confrontations in cities such as Barcelona. So I feel that whereas before this general bafflement was more or less going through, I think, generally affected people, but not in any direct actionist way, Spain has now become much more aware and I say active and actionist against what is happening at the moment. So that is a perhaps brief synopsis of the situation in Spain, David.
Could I return to Ervin Laszlo? Ervin, I provided in my notes some reference to stress tests, and I may have been vague, may not have been, and I put that into context with the austerity measures that Kingsley had pointed out. Do you see any validity in reappointing those stress tests towards the establishment of sustainability of communities, of further advancement in education, rather than applying those stress tests to an old paradigm of economic realities?
Well, I'm very clear, and I have been very clear and very vocal in writing about the distinction between trying to create something new or go back to try to restabilize something old. Anything that we try to bring back and to mediate stresses on the current system is counterproductive in the sense that it will just enlarge the time horizon so that these things, the business as usual goes on, not quite as usual, but the current system manages to muddle through, and the situation becomes worse because the stresses actually grow on it. So I think it's very clear that what the political leadership is trying to do, readings, for example, the declarations of the G20, is really to pump in some money into the banks, is trying to restabilize currency rates, is trying to bring rates of exchange and holdings, foreign exchange holdings and this kind of thing into some kind of a balance, at least for the time being, so as to manage the economy, particularly the case in Europe with one Mediterranean country after another going through enormous stresses and getting close to default. Now, the question is, do people have an understanding of this? I think they understand that something is wrong. I'm not sure that people understand that the austerity measures are something that will pull it right. One is talking increasingly, one is talking about the stresses to which people are exposed. In Italy, for example, there is a very good pragmatic approach to trying to generate income and cut down on corruption and simply on cheating, especially when it comes to declarations of income tax. They're quite fabulous. Data came to light about how many people are really living on a very luxurious level and declaring some ridiculously small income. Now people then everywhere are being now exposed to this kind of a test, to see whether you really live like you declare what you have. And this creates a lot of psychological stress on people. Of course, people who are cheating, and a lot of people do that, are particularly stressed, but the everyday person is as well. So these austerity measures just feel like an imposition. It's very strange, in Mediterranean countries, perhaps Kingsley can testify or talk on that too. But in Italy, more than anywhere else, I think there's been a laissez-faire kind of an attitude, enjoy life and corruption is not really something bad. It's just something you don't really talk about and you don't announce, you don't do it in public, but it's what everybody does and this is how life is. And this was a kind of an attitude that has been entrenched in all through the latter part of the 20th century in this country, in Italy. And now that you can't do that anymore. And why can't you do that anymore? People don't really understand. Something is being mismanaged. So there is a sense of things going wrong, that the remedies that are being applied are really problematic, and hopes that they don't really apply too much to one's own actions. But maybe they are necessary, but hopefully then other people will comply with it. So this is the kind of attitude I see around me. But as I said, I don't do a systematic survey of things. And just when I talk to people around me in the neighborhood, I feel that kind of an attitude. So I don't see too much of an understanding of stresses, a test applied to the old system. I think that is passé. The question I think that people would respond to, I think, is to show what can be done that is truly creating something that it doesn't need austerity. That's something where you can move positively forward, not just tightening the belt so that we can live with the old, but creating something new. And when you say something like this, when you show new ways of living, new models for lifestyles, then I think people perk up and all of a sudden, what can one do? Can we really do that? And how can we do that? I think the way to go forward is really on the creative level, not on the retrenching and trying to preserve the old.
Before I turn to you, Ashok, for a response to that, may I just stay with you, Ervin, as to the speed of change in education? Because I had mentioned in my notes the triggers of the movements of people, which I've looked at in civilizations before, combined with austerity, combined with social changes. How quickly do you think that education can adapt and start incorporating these issues in the curriculums that younger people are looking at now, so that they can get a better grasp, a quicker grasp on creating different types of sustainability?
Well, there are two questions here. How quickly can the system change, or quickly will the system change? The will, I think, the forecast is somewhat pessimistic, at least on my side. I have been saying that the educational system, especially system of higher education, there's only one institution that is more conservative than that, and that's the Vatican. Otherwise, I see the more prestigious a university is, for example, the more conservative it tends to be. Because the tried and tested methods that's what made a university big, and those are the methods that the university wants to keep on doing. Everything else is a risk, and it's frowned on by the people who, after all, have made the university what it is, and they have studied these things, and they're handing it down. So there is a built-in conservative, built-in self-preservative element in the system of education, especially in higher education. But when you say, can it change? This is what I said before, is the will it change? I don't know actually whether it will, but the prospects for it in the short term are rather poor. But whether it can change, that's obvious. It can. It could. We have access to knowledge. We have access to skills. We have access to information. There are at the creative margins of the educational system, on the internet, on various projects that are coming together on the periphery of the educational system. New initiatives are emerging. New knowledge is coming online. People are inquiring. Now, this have to be put together and inserted into a curriculum of a kind which is no longer mainstream, but has the position of the mainstream, so that it reaches people. This, by the way, is the objective that I'm dedicated to now for the past 2 years in a university that carries the name of Giordano Bruno, which is to launch its degree programs in September, precisely trying to do this, harnessing the creativity that is around in the margins, putting it together in such a way that people can have access to it, get a degree, and wherever they are for much less cost of inscription and tuition than the mainstream universities, and yet get at the same time this kind of a well, into some sense revolutionary, some sense insidious, but in a very positive way, heretical system. That's why it carries the name of Giordano Bruno. So I think it can be done. We are trying to do it, but I don't see how some of the mainstream institutions will really go along with this. Some people inside those institutions, and Ashok is a prime example, do go along and already are doing it. But I don't know whether the institutions themselves, the mainstream of the mainstream, will go along. In any case, this is growing on the edges, on the periphery. And as we know, all evolution starts at the periphery and then grows toward the center. And this process has started. The question is, how fast can we bring it through?
May I pass that over to you, Ashok Gangadeen, particularly as in my notes, the type of communication systems that will come into play in order to change the educational model, to change academia, to stay at the same pace, or indeed to be ahead of the curve, as it were?
Thank you, David. I really appreciate Ervin's brilliant laying out, first in his first remarks about the question of the laissez-faire, the remedies for the old way, austerity measures and so forth, and the lack of the vision and articulate literacy for a new culture, new paradigms, new ways of being human together in upgrading our cultures. And I wanted to comment on that and then get back to education, which is, of course, my primary life work of 44 years here as a professor in one of the best colleges in America, and the state of education. I think I fully agree with Ervin that the higher the prestige of a college or university, the more the retro conservatism of the old ways and the need to urgently upgrade and shift literacy to truly higher education. What we call higher education ain't high enough. We really have to meet the crises on the planet and the severity, to really dilate our minds and hearts and language and script and rationality in order to meet the moment. But before I develop that point, let me say a few things about his first set of remarks about the mismanagement of culture, the lack of vision in our leadership. That was the main point I was making about responding to the stresses. I agree with Ervin that the primary dominant response is to patch up the old current system and get whatever remedies we can to restabilize and manage with the dysfunctions, and yet not properly diagnosing the depth and cause of the gross crises at all levels of our culture. That to me is a core issue. Are we listening to our great wisdom teachers over centuries and millennia who have been diagnosing the stress problem? And what I've been pointing out and seeing in this global consciousness shift, understanding the nature of the evolutionary shift that has been peripheral and marginal, as Ervin points out, but needs to come into mainstream, is, are we hearing the core message of our great teachers? I mean, from the Moses and Jesus and Buddha, Krishna, Lao Tzu, Socrates, Plato, all of these great across the planet, they've seen that we make our worlds with our consciousness and the lens that we're using, the technology of our minds. And that has really been seen to be the main function of shaping our worlds and our culture and our life. And what the diagnosis is from our great evolutionary elders, all of them, they see that to the extent that we are lodged and trapped in a cave mind, a cave packaging of our script and our rational powers, our culture becomes fragmented and dysfunctional. Multiply that over centuries and millennia, and we have the world we have today. What is the prime diagnosis? Our elders, our wisdom teachers have seen that the dominance of ego-based thinking and world-making generates breakdowns, polarizations, either or, scarcity, at every aspect of our culture. So it really is a whole systems meltdown of a dysfunctional, outmoded technology of consciousness that is being seen. And our academic institutions in America, let us say, but I think it's a global scale. And this is where Ervin and I have been talking for the last several years about visioning a new educational system that would be whole system based and bringing the global consciousness and literacy to connect the dots across a fragmented, broken world. And that is quite urgent. And so on the question of education, I'm right now, in fact, at Haverford, again, one of the top in the nation, seeking to innovate the curriculum that is chronically fragmented. What we call liberal arts today is packaged into pieces of mind bites and local fields, all localized. And whether it's physics and economics and philosophy and religion and literature and poetry and music, all of these are in boxes. And we are desperately lacking the ecological power to connect the dots and see a whole system integral education. And that really is what we're talking about, to move to the integral, holistic, flourishing culture, to move from a culture of scarcity and either or and win-lose to a truly win-win, flourishing culture of abundance. It calls for this upgrade in the literacy to a holistic, integral, dialogic human being and culture space. So that would be one of the main themes I hope to develop, David.
Kingsley, could I turn to you on that? Your response to all the aforementioned comments that have been made, and Ashok has just used the word scarcity. We have talked about poverty consciousness in the past. Your general thoughts at this stage?
Thank you, David. Both Ervin and Ashok have spoken wonderfully on these issues. Perhaps I will start with responding to the consciousness aspect and maybe later go into the education. And what both Ervin and Ashok have rightly said is that this consciousness of wishing to maintain almost a status quo is a form of this mental rational consciousness that, in a sense, almost doesn't feel that the system needs replacing. It just needs propping up into a better position. And even recently, some comments that I received from my work from someone in North America, the comment was, if the system ain't broke, don't fix it. And this seems to imply that there's still the mindset that the system is not on its last legs. It still has more space, more room, more life in it, and that we should continue with this system. And I say this, and Ashok has spoken well on this, is this ego-driven, this rational consciousness that, in a sense, is part of the old mind. And what I've been almost seeing is, or what I phrase it, is a clash of mythologies. Is that as we're going through a transition and changes in society, we also need to look at our obviously our frames of reference, our perspective, our perceptions, and that is crucial to how we frame our worldview and how we, from that, look at our social systems. So it's almost if we are this clash of the systems is parallel to a clash of perceptions, or we could frame it in a grander way of clash of mythologies. Is that the mental rational way, which is which holds on to this vertical top down control management system that has been for several centuries has been the dominant script, and has brought us to where we are, especially post the Second Industrial Revolution. And yet, what we need to move to is an integral, what Ashok calls a win-win mentality or perspective. And this perhaps is a consciousness that is more appropriate to frame what we've discussed in the past, David, about a horizontal, lateral, distributed type of connectivity and communications, which moves away from the vertical, top-down, centralized control. So this rational structure we can visualize vertical, and the integral, ecological is a more lateral, distributed, almost cyclic type of structure. Ashok mentioned the scarcity of the old mind versus the abundance of the new mind. Now, these terms are quite, especially when we talk in terms of physical resources, are very heavily laden with many associations. If we talk about abundance, some people may sense that we're talking about abundance in terms of resources, and we have many resources at our fingertips, and no need to worry about, I say, the resources position. But and I know that the way we frame it here is differently. Abundance is also a position of perspective. It's a position that recognizes that we have abundance within. We have the capacity, we have the potential to innovate, to find creative solutions, because we embrace that abundance. That comes from changing our perception and our mindset. So if we can move from this win-lose, this position of duality, which has been the previous dominant script, towards a sense of integral consciousness that sees society and humanity and resources within a living, dynamic system, then abundance comes from a coherent, harmonious participation within this system. So I think we need to distinguish between scarcity and abundance in terms of capacity, innovation, creativity on the one hand, and physical scarcity and abundance on the other. And if I may just quickly come back to the comments on education, again, I agree with everything Ervin and Ashok has said. And the question that Ervin brought up, again, about can we change and will we change? I'd like to pose a question about will we change? Well, in a sense, I feel we have to, but the time frame is the issue. Many of our educational institutions today are moving towards a business model. I know from experience in England, many of the universities are now moved over to an increased top-up fee. That is, students have to pay an increased fee, and that fee does change according to the status of the university. And I may wonder that if the younger generation starts to go elsewhere to look for their education, such as new innovative educational models from the internet, so to speak, and Ervin brought up the Giordano Bruno Global Shift University, if there's a drop in physical intake at universities, and therefore a drop in the business model, will this force universities to think twice about their curriculum and educational model? So I may pose that question, David.
I'd like to pass that over to you, if I may, Ervin. And also at this stage, I had in my notes mentioned your work in the Akashic field. And Kingsley had mentioned this integral theory. And you talked about the integral theory of everything in your work in the Akashic field. Would you like to expand upon that?
What Kingsley has been talking about, he mentioned the word worldview, overall conception of who we are and what this world is. I think within the concept of science that I've been dealing with lately, for the past year or so increasingly, is the concept of a paradigm that is accepted in science, is the current paradigm, is the dominant way of thinking. This paradigm is in the leading edge sciences is far more evolved than it is in society, because there is also such a thing as a general worldview in society, and that's even behind the one that's in science. And yet, at the mainstream science paradigm itself is in need of revision, because even that is not sufficiently corresponding to the findings, to the facts. So I think the key issue is, perhaps we can put it in these terms, the key issue is our level of consciousness with which we are approaching our problems and our situation. And our level of consciousness, in turn, is very largely depends on how we see the world. Ashok also talked about the new lens, the different lenses, well, and different languages. So there are different universes that we live in, because the world outside doesn't uniquely determine the world that we perceive. Our perception of the world is in itself largely a creative act. It's not that we can perceive anything at all. I mean, we like to perceive angels and demons, but some people perhaps do, but I have a difficulty in finding those. As to what we get from the world is underdetermined as to the interpretation. We can produce interpretations. Now, it turns out that the interpretation that we had of our experience is producing more heat than light. It's failing us on all these levels. It's producing stresses. It's producing less than well-being. It's malaise in various levels of society, in increasing segments of society, including in the educational model. So the time has come, in the interest of coping with our problems, of finding ourselves masters of our destiny instead of servants of the trends that go by around us without being able to get a handle on it. In that interest, I think we have to seriously think about what kind of a world is it. Now, Kingsley has been outlining some of the things that I think are essential to the new paradigm, the systemic, holistic vision. Ashok has been working on that, and we've been developing that together for these many years. I think basically it's there. This world is not a mechanism, and it's not a dual kind of thing where it's everybody against everybody else. It's a kind of a jungle. By the way, the jungle itself is still would be a much better metaphor than what we consider basically as a big mechanism. At least a jungle has some coherence. Sometimes it's violent, but it's functional in the sense that it makes for the survival of the various member species. But in our world, there is mindless, unnecessary violence. There is separation. There are distinctions, that packaging of the modules, not only within the university educational setting, but within society. This is what I'm doing. This is what you're doing. This is my nation. This is yours. This is one company. That's another one. This is science. That is spirituality. In all these boxes. And finally, the key box of all, humanity versus the nature versus the environment, that we are on top of it. We are the master species. That assumption, which has been motivating really our technological applications for the past 50 years or so, is breaking down. We have to see that we are not above this world. We are part of it. That economy is not the overall system within which that we have nature as one element, but economy is one element in a system whereby humanity is inserted into nature, and that's one aspect of human behavior within the context of the biosphere. All these things have to be turned around, and it's a big change, and ultimately it's a question of going back and saying, how do we see the world? What Ashok has been saying before, now let me just conclude on this note, about the great spiritual teachers of the past, entirely true. They have seen the world in radically different ways. We have seen the world in only one of many ways, the kind of ways that has been one particular interpretation championed by Francis Bacon, for example, but a very mechanistic, narrow interpretation of Galileo's concept and Newton's concept, which Newton himself and Galileo themselves were not for it, and the Cartesian concepts, etc. All of these are past their prime. They have served if they serve a purpose, yes. We have better medical technologies. We have better possibilities for living a life living longer, but on the other hand, we are no longer able to maintain a population of 7 billion people on this small planet. And this is the key factor. And if we don't change this view, we're all going to suffer, and eventually we are endangering our entire species.
Ashok, continuing from the statements made by Ervin, I had asked about the Akashic field, about the sense of consciousness and that evolution today. Could you place that into the context of your own work? Particularly, I'm so very interested in the double bracket language that you use.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate Ervin's remarks. The idea of the Akashic field, of course, comes from the classical Sanskrit understanding, Vedantic and Vedic tradition of the yoga science, that there must be the primal field of reality is a field of information. And why? Because it goes to the field, whether you call it Tao or Om or Yahweh or Allah or Christ, the unified field of nature, the origin of the universe, if originating cause, whatever name we use, the logos in the Greek Socrates, Plato, Aristotle tradition, calling it the logos, which is the infinite source of rational light and language and script and intelligence. All of these wondrous names all recognize that there must be an infinite primal force as the origin of the universe. And the science, let's call it science in this high sense, recognizing that this field is infinite script. This is revolutionary, because when we hear the word script or word or language, we think of signs in the box that we use to describe reality. But if in the beginning is the logos, if the beginning is Tao or Om, as all of these great traditions are converging on a consensus, what is the nature of this primal field? Whatever name we use, let's call it the logosphere, the holosphere. It is the Akashic field. And why is it Akashic? Well, it's filled with infinite information, meaning, script. This is a flood. And all of our great teachers have been saying humanity in our evolutionary journey need to come out of the caves, come out of the limited script, the boxing and cartoonizing and packaging artificially of the script we use into a holistic, integral Akashic script. We are as we script, and if we're scripting with a broken script, we'll be broken people in a broken culture, with broken education, economics, politics. Everything will be broken and reflect the script that shapes our world, because that's a primal technology in shaping realities. So the call of humanity in this drama is to mature out of our ego pillar stage into the holistic, mature literacy and the calculus of surfing the Akashic field of reality itself. That is the source of abundance. Picking up at what Kingsley beautifully said about abundance, not just in a physical sense in the old paradigm, and we think of money as a measure of abundance, but our great teachers knew that there's a logonomics, not just an egonomics, not ego money. There's a soul of money. Books are being written like Lynn Twist, The Soul of Money, or Charles Eisenstein, The Sacred Economy, or Theology of Money. This has been a classical ancient understanding that there's ego-based money. I use single bracket to mark that out. Single bracket dollars, so to speak, and money and resources blocks access to the unified field of wealth and flow, which is life itself. That's the wealth. So the consciousness that dilates us into the field, the Akashic field of interconnectivity, this is the script of abundance. And this is the kind of culture, the paradigm shift to deeper science and culture making and education and politics and a new economic life that's grounded in the source and the resource and the funding of the fundamental Akashic field. So I'm trying here, David, to bring this strange sounding word Akashic field, where it's seen that the world is script itself. Logos, God, is script. Om is script. We are script beings. And if we're disconnected, we're starving in the scarcity. And the true abundance is to just dilate that space. And teachers like Jesus would say, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto Logos, the field, what is the wealth there. And that is the logonomic wealth and culture we're looking for, David.
Kingsley, I'm going to turn to you to respond to Ashok and Ervin's comments. And in the notes again, Kingsley, I had introduced the idea of ethereal language. I'm not necessarily moving into some sort of far-reaching etherical concept here, but there is validity in the way that we deal with each other, deal with situations, the way that we communicate. Your thoughts on that and your response to Ervin and Ashok?
Well, thank you, David. That's a very valid point. You just mentioned at the end of your question the ethereal language. Listening to Ervin and Ashok speaking, in my mind, listening to them, I was focused on the issue of vocabulary. Now, as Ashok has rightly said, the great teachers of the past, they manifested this logos, the primal force, the akashic field, as Ervin so wonderfully explained, through their parables, their language, their teachings. And this was a means, a channel of communication to pass on some sense of this reality, which for centuries and for most of our known history has been in an invisible dimension, perhaps. What is imperative for us is that in order to manifest a worldview, a perceptual understanding, which can be more coherent to where we need to go as a global society, then to manifest that understanding, we need to physically have a structure and a vocabulary for it, because it's a responsibility that this dimension, this knowing, this primal force, to manifest in physical matter, because the matter and mind, they are aspects of the same primal force and they exist together. And social systems in our life, therefore, need to engage with that expression, that emergence. It's both an emergence and an immersion. So the revolution, perhaps, that we need to go through today is a revolution in our vocabulary, our language, our communication. And this, I feel, is perhaps part of the fragmentation, the disruption, the ripples in the ocean that we're going through now. Because if we can witness what's happening in the debates around us on the mainstream media, and even this debate we're having now, this discussion, it's trying to find the correct framing and the correct vocabulary and language to express this emergence. And so we have a primal field. We have a dimension which is both intangible and tangible at the same time. And it's this non-locality, this eternal presence, which encompasses this living system, this connectivity at all times. And so, as you can see, we're perhaps struggling today, even now, with bringing this vocabulary forth. The recent work that Ervin Laszlo is doing, and the decades that Ashok has been working on this theme, are part of the projects to bring this understanding, this taste of the Akashic, the non-locality, our integral primal nature, more into the mainstream domain, more into the mainstream realm. And this is not an overnight occurrence. This takes time. It's almost as if two streams are now reaching the ocean, and they have to merge, and they have to have an emergence. And so, if we can correct this vocabulary, if we can find a consensus and a coherence in describing and explaining this shift from a dominant ego, rational, mental perspective, consciousness, language into an integral logos, primal force language, then that is part of the whole movement. It's a part of a movement which manifests through our social systems and our economics and a whole array of the systems. And I really like the word logonomics, which Ashok has used. That again is a part of parcel of the new vocabulary. And so this vocabulary can also express what may be occurring in physical systems in a dematerialization. we've talked before, David, and we've talked before about moving towards less away from heavy physical infrastructure, more towards finer systems. For example, away from cables and the telegraph towards Wi-Fi, and this also represents a dematerialization of our physical structures, and this is almost parallels a sense of moving towards a ethereal dematerialization in our language, a language which moves away from the heavy physical extremes towards a finer, subtler expression of an emerging integral non-local consciousness. So these are all embedded: our vocabulary, our consciousness, our perspective, our worldview, and our systems are all entwined. And interestingly, this point was raised by Leonard Shlain in his work, The Goddess versus the Alphabet, in the sense of how our language and vocabulary is a clash against how we perceive our systems. So they're all integral, they're all embedded, and how one emerges will affect the emergence, understanding, and acceptance of these other forms, David.
I was going to move on, Kingsley, and bring you in on the way that immersion or that translation of language was going to take place, particularly in regards to 3D manufacturing. And you had sent me an article on that. But before I do, Kingsley, if I may, I'm just going to ask for a response from Ashok, particularly with some more depth to this logonomics, that expression, and in particular, to introduce the next topic, the dematerialization that is required.
Yes, thank you, David. I really, again, appreciate so much Kingsley's brilliant range of remarks. I think he instinctively hits the right themes and tones about the new vocabulary, a new script, the correct language. This is huge because that's been, from my point of view, looking over thousands of years of our greatest wisdom teachers saying, pay attention to your script. You are your script. If you're using a broken script and ego-based, I use single brackets to mark that. It's so enormously important in understanding the shift and getting the right scientific medical diagnosis of our human condition, to mark single brackets when we're speaking the ego-based, what Socrates would call a cave script, and stepping into the light, into the logos, which is the journey of philosophy. I use double parentheses for that script, which is the basic logic of logos, the basic code, the script of the Akashic field of reality itself. That we become fully human, rational beings when we know the script of reason, of the logos. And this is where the non-locality, we have to enter presence. You can't objectify. And this is a huge point I'd like to focus on, because the difference between the logonomics, which is entering in and living the script, as Jesus, for example, called us here, and he says, I am the script, the logos in the flesh, which is an enormous revolutionary idea. Buddha is saying the same thing, that we have to live the Zen, in that when you carry water, carry water. You are the script. When Descartes stepped out of the box and said, I am, and he was shocked to realize he was his very script utterance by saying, I am, that was who he is. His being is the script, and we are script beings. This is a huge shift. It's a shift to a different dimension. And if you remain in the cave script, so to speak, and objectify, what is diagnostically clear is that when you objectify as if it were on the screen of your consciousness, your life, your culture, your mental states, your experience, all put in a kind of screen, a box, separate from the thinker herself, we don't realize the tremendous damage that this can do to our life and our culture and ourselves. Because when you objectify yourself in the box, you make yourself an entity, a thing, and that is a source of deep materialization. Even your spiritual life can be materialized as objectified and reduced to the box from the double bracket sphere of non-locality and presence. So the ultimate question before us in the vocabulary and the literacy of becoming a human and a mature species is, are we stuck in a dysfunctional script that's taking us down? And at the heart medically of the crises we face, the breakdown in human relations, the breakdown in our inner integral psyche into polarized self and mental states, the breakdown of our love relationships with other humans, with raising our children. All the great moral teachers warned, do not objectify a human being. You're not a thing, you're not an entity, which is materialization in this deeper sense. If you put God in the box and Jesus in the box and Buddha in the box, you materialize spirit itself. That is the source of the malpractice, of the wrongful, immature script. So to move into and cross and mature centuries and millennia coming into the integral, non-local presence, that is the space that we flourish. That's the abundance we're speaking of.
Kingsley, let me return to you now, particularly on this issue of materialization. I have to set this out properly, and obviously, please feel free to respond to Ashok's comments there, particularly in regards to living in the script. But it appears to me that there is somewhat of a deadlock in society today because of the disconnect brought around between people and the social makeup and industry and business and the way that that is conducted. And that is now where I bring us to the new types of manufacturing, the 3D manufacturing, the reversal of an extractive economy or an extractive resource to one that is far different, that is not extracting minds, not extracting people's being, not extracting the resources that we have on Mother Earth. Your thoughts to that, as well as I say, feel free your response to Ashok.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Ashok. I mean, Ashok speaks wonderfully, and I agree. I agree with everything he said, and they're combined. What Ashok's been talking about, and your question, David, they're combined because they're all part of our perceptions, and this immature script, the dysfunctional script, does indeed is polarized our states, as Ashok rightly say. And I liked Ashok's phrase, "enter into presence," and this presence is a state which we need now to enter into in a way of this embraces the way the communication is going. Now, industry and business, as you brought up, David, these forms, industry and business, they're still in the industrial revolution model, so to speak. Now, we've talked about the post-industrial time, and the language which is being used today, this which I agree is still part of the dysfunctional script, is the industry business centralization model, which is it's about control more than it is about money. It's about power. It's about finding something, delivering it to people, but controlling everything along the way, controlling where the resources are found, the control channels, the medium of distribution and the medium of expression, and it's pinpoint delivery. Now, there's a sense of apprehension that this type of mentality, this mental, rational, industrial mentality, will try to exploit or almost try to usurp the model that we need to move into. And when you have a mentality or a perspective which, for those whom it works for, then you don't want to give it up. And it's a delusion, and it can make you feel that this perspective can work. I need to adapt it. I need to tweak it, but I don't need to replace it. Now, if you try to adapt and tweak the same mentality into a new model, then you have basically the same old model, but with a different facade, but not with a different content, not with new wine in old bottles. So, this is a central question: is that industry and business, we may speak badly of them. We may denounce industry, business, and commerce as being anti-evolutionary, but not so. Industry has been a forward-pushing momentum in social evolution, as has technology. Now, we need commerce because commerce, as Ashok has rightly said, is an energy of transaction. And the energy of transaction can work equally well in the new model as in the old model. It's tools within our hands. And so this 3D manufacture, which you brought up, David, this is not the old model at all, because it completely puts forth a way of production which can be in the hands of the masses. Now, to briefly talk about what 3D manufacture can entail, there are devices which are getting increasingly smaller. Now they're the size of perhaps a small refrigerator. In the future, they'll be the size of a small printer that can print through a variety of different mediums, plastic and nanomaterial, can print goods that can materialize at the point of manufacture, the point of production. Now, if these devices can be located almost anywhere in a distributed model, then this entails that people can connect with a point of production and a point of consumerism, which is local and specific to their context. It's a distributed model. Now, this is something to speak of the future. This is still a contested model, and there are still debates over the future of technology. However, what I feel is important in this is that just by putting out there that this potential of distributed economy, distributed goods and production, to put it out there, it's like a mental virus, but I mean in a good sense. It can be contagious. Once this potential starts to move through the mindset and our way of thinking, then that can help to start to push us away from a centralized model, and it will catalyze other forms of innovative production, and it will open up a whole plethora of visionary potentials. Now, at the moment, many people are still not aware of 3D printing, and some people are still suspicious. If this model can actually be proven to work and be a model that will be a growth economy, then that is central, because that will open up, like I said, open up the potential that will catalyze other visionaries and other people coming into this. And something we should also talk about in terms of this manufacture is the manufacturing innovative ideas are coming from areas of the world such as India and China. Now, we have millions and millions, and in the next 10 years, a potential 1 billion more people connecting to the internet. Now, you have, in the next decade, a potential of millions of creative, innovative minds connecting to the internet, connecting to a distributed economy and distributed networks of ideas. Many of these people will be in a position of needing to create innovations. Not wanting to, but needing to. Now, imagine the type of catalyzation that can come through this surge of innovative minds adding to our already existing knowledge base. Now, I would like to see how that would add to manufacturing in the next decade, David.
Ashok, I have a long-winded question, but please bear with me, because this returns us to a prior conversation where we utilized the word democratization. And in the aforementioned article that I referenced with Kingsley, they had termed this as the third industrial revolution. I cannot find myself resonating with that, because that indicates old language. But what is it, do you think, Ashok, that can be attained by the type of process that Kingsley is talking to here, that can be created on the basis of localization, that is not a global imposition in terms of a power structure or a consumerism that we've had before, but can be created for communities in localization for their own benefit, but not necessarily imposing any type of global mandate upon them? I'm being slightly vague. Do you understand where I'm going with that, Ashok?
I do, David, and let me try to just put it in a slightly different languaging. First of all, I really appreciate Kingsley's remarks about a mental virus and connecting it with the internet. Last time you opened up the question of democratization when we spoke of the democratization of enlightenment, where enlightenment here indicates the precisely the script of Jesus, of Buddha, the script of Moses, of Muhammad, all of these great script shifters. We're trying to call their local tribal cultures to a global script where we have the power now to interconnect and communicate across the borders of our different worldviews that have divided us so badly, and to enter a nonviolent space where global culture can flourish. I would make a distinction, David, between global in the double bracket sense of a true global script and global literacy, and entering not just the internet but the intranet is a metaphor from the Buddhist language for the unified field. Indra is the infinite field where it has infinite points of connectivity. Everything is interactive and interrelational. That's intranet. And if a culture can mature to be a community in that global sacred space, we will then be in releasing our true creativity and flourishing human potential, as Kingsley alluded to, our potential, our creative potential. And that is where the synergy, double bracket synergy, is the shared energy of the community in co-creativity and local freedom. So the way I would word this is that in the old paradigm, there's a breakdown, as is typical, between the local and the global. So in those terms, the single bracket global has to be some dominant force that's imposed top down upon the grassroots life of the people. But the democratization, understood as the liberation of power to the people, which translates into the individual sacred rights and of life, liberty, and pursuit of each individual. If that is democratization, and think of the cultural democratization, the script democratization, literacy, rationality, that is the dignity of a liberated human being, where individuals locally are connected globally. In the double bracket culture, local is global, because every PowerPoint and intranet encodes the whole. So when each individual is flourishing in her local locus of life, in her own village, so to speak, there is no break from being connected with the entire field. That's the butterfly effect. And the Buddha fly, I always call it playfully, the Buddha fly effect is when we act locally, we affect the entire field with our presence and our liberated life. That is a different way of understanding the local to the global. And I think the technologies that are gifted from the logosphere and logonomics, whether it's the internet power and the cell phone and the computer power, all of these technologies, all gifts to culture, come from the double bracket field. And when we realize that and acknowledge it, we'll understand that internet can be a powerful way to get us into intranet, which is the space of the Akashic flow of flourishing. David.
Ashok, I'm going to stay with you, and Kingsley, please bear with me. Moving into a different type of manufacturing, I thought that was wonderful, the way that you use this double bracket appointment to the meaning of global and localization. But in order to take that forward and not to return back, or as Kingsley had stated, to be pressed with staying where we are in the current reality, how do we utilize academia and education to be able to remain involved and evolve with some type of new manufacturing, particularly as academia tends to be very involved in R&D in the manufacturing sphere, and keeping it connected to those manufacturers so they do move towards this universal script. They do find a universal symbolism or script that can take us to where we need to go. Is it education that could be vital in assuring that?
That's a great question. One would think that it would be education. But again, as Ervin pointed out, the reason why he is in the initiative of the Brno University, of Shift University, and I've been seeking in the academy to open up global dialogue and global literacy. And I've now, before the Educational Policy Committee, a proposal to renovate our educational curriculum with introducing global literacy, which is what we're talking about, the capacity to dilate the lens of our mind and therefore our life into the integral script that our great traditions have been calling us into. I think that when I look at the state of the academy, it is retro by and large in the sense of academic institutions that where we reproduce our culture. It's a cultural womb to reproduce our youth and leadership for the future. Our education is the way we pass on the cultural memes or the script that we have. And the academy is, so to speak, the keeper of the script. And if the script, conservatism of the old script that we've known, and to hold that in the academy, then I would look to the business world out there where the entrepreneurs, the ones who can adapt and shift and dance simply because we have to meet the shifting change, the winds of change. Kingsley rightly pointed out that the new paradigm culture cannot be put into the old bottles. The new wine, the new script, the opening up to presence, the culture of presence has to really dilate into a new bottle. It has to come out of the cave into the open space of global culture. So I would say, David, that the entrepreneurial power of business leaders and people innovating commerce and manufacturing and all aspects of bringing technology to the marketplace, that's where I think the shift in money and the management and understanding of money from economics to logonomics, there is indeed a revolution taking place in certain enclaves of business leadership from the old bottom line of profit alone to a triple bottom line where the worker and the workplace and humanity of the person and the impact on the ecology becomes all part of the economic structure and ethos and the ethics of money making in that more awakened diet. That's a great sign. So I think that the manufacturing, business, commerce world and the tradition of entrepreneurial adaptivity in the Darwinian sense of survival of the fittest, which could go negative, but in this positive sense, we need to adapt and morph and upshift our ways of commerce and business and money flow. And the Occupy movement is a signal. Kingsley referred to this at the beginning, and certainly here in the Philadelphia region, the Occupy movement is a sign of something has to happen, but lacking the script and the self-articulation as to what it is going to be. It's not just on Wall Street, it's on Main Street. It's not just on Main Street, it's occupy the campus, occupy ourselves, occupy in the sense of enter the double bracket space. That is where the Occupy movement needs to go, David.
Kingsley, Dennis, I'm going to turn to you for your response to Ashok, sir, but I'd also like to just have you incorporate into that response the issue of the triple bottom line. And also, we have all talked before, I've raised this idea of tangibility in monetary systems. And I provided this in my notes in terms of functional giving and in transactions. It's the tangibility, is it not, that has to take place, the assessment of tangibility in the social interaction for all of those aforementioned ideas to be successful to where you find a win-win.
Yes, thank you, David. And there's so many points that Ashok raised there that in some senses he's really hit the nail on the head. And I'd love to respond first to what Ashok is talking about in terms of the social entrepreneurs. No, I agree entirely that in many ways, some of the old structures, such as academia, perhaps are too slow in being at the forefront of this change. And not only do we need the vision and the creativity, we need the people with means to put this into practice. And perhaps, David, that comes back to the question of tangibility. And I feel that there's been, in the last several years especially, an emergence of, let's say, I don't like to use the word a new breed, but I will do in this sense, a new breed of social entrepreneurs who are younger and more tech savvy, who are engaging with a changing world from a different perspective. Now, the concept that we have of, let's say, philanthropists, for example, entrepreneurs and philanthropists. Philanthropists often were seen as the titans of industry who charitably gave to create museums and libraries in their name, dotted throughout many of their home cities as a way of leaving something behind in respect. Now, we're seeing a rise now of social entrepreneurs and many younger people, especially, who've made their money in technology, such as in the tech.com boom, which also went bust. Younger people with more money who are embedded in a global world, who understand that it's not just enough to act locally, but to feel and sense and to act in a worldwide and on a global scale. And there are a range of philanthropic projects that have been, I won't mention any names, but people who have come through, such as the Google, the eBay, these areas, who are now creating lots of projects. And a project comes to mind is, for example, one project called Kickstart, which is creating money to develop local technologies that communities can build up and take themselves and develop themselves, train themselves to use it and empower their own communities. Now, it's not the old model where you create a dependency with someone. No, socialpreneurs, and especially what's been termed, I didn't term this, but they've been termed techno-philanthropists, who are creating, stimulating innovations for people to train themselves to use and go away and empower their own communities. Now, this is a distributed model, and this is a sign of industry and commerce and entrepreneurship engaging with the world on a new model. And I feel that this type of emerging projects can actually step ahead from some of the old institutions which are more difficult to move, or may take more time to move, because they're not dealing with the same restraints. They're not dealing with academic boards or a consensus decision to change a certain way of being. And also, social entrepreneurs can operate outside the old business model. They may not have to engage with shareholders, such as older corporations may have to do. They don't have to engage with perhaps looking for donations, such as some NGOs have to rely on. So socialpreneurs can be fast, they can be quick, they can operate outside the box, and they can get to the heart of the problem because they're embedded in a world where these situations have arisen. And I hope that there will be an increase in what we see as social entrepreneurs, younger people with money, but rather investing it in the banks, they wish to invest it in social and global betterment. Now, I feel that this can be part of the tangibility that you're talking about, David. And again, these signs can be infectious and can be contagious in a positive sense that can stimulate other people to want to get into these developing projects and get in on the act. Now, obviously, the question has always been about these tangibles have to be in the new model. They have to be open source. They have to give away intellectual property rights. They have to allow people to take them and develop them, because the industry of the future will be many minds tackling the problems and the issues of today. It won't be several minds within an industry think tank trying to develop a project which they have 10 years patent on. No. The industry of the future will have to be released, give away the patent, give away the copyright, and give it to the people and say, here you are, I'm developing this, now go away and expand upon it, develop it. And then send the developing model back into society and let other develop it. Now, this is the framework which open source software is used, such as Firefox, the browser, which millions of people are using throughout the world today, and Linux open source software as well. If this type of model can be used to industry, you can have billions of minds, creative minds from around the world working on an issue, then that we're going to see an exponential growth of these issues. Now, and just to give an example of that, an example of how old industry came into new industry, if I can finish on this, there was an example of a CEO who had acquired a mining company, and he wanted to invest into developing the mines. So he brought his engineers together and said, tell me where I should drill, where should I invest my millions? And the engineers said, well, we're not quite sure, because in this problem, etc., takes more than our knowledge. This CEO was brave enough to take the new model, and he published the blueprints of his mining operation, which are usually kept in safes. He published them on the internet, and he gave a challenge. He said, anyone who can tell me where to successfully drill, I will give them X hundreds of thousands of dollars, and go away and think about it. And within a year, he got 3 different people coming back and giving him the right answer. And these people were not orthodox engineers. There were people who were from a different way of life because they brought a different perspective to the issue. The question is, in industry, if we keep industry curtailed within the same model, we're only going to be offering the situation to the same minds. We need to offer the industry model to minds who use a different perspective, minds who are out of the box. And the millions of minds that we have out there, can bring a different perspective. Then we have a growth of tangibles, David.
Ashok, I am simply excited to receive your response to that.
Yes, I really appreciate these remarks by Kingsley, and I think from the same mind and the move to many mind and the tangibility issue, I would like to elaborate on the tangibility, because it has to be, using the word manifest, embodied in the nitty-gritty of life, the making it tangible. And again, there are 2 kinds of tangibilities. One is tangible in the old paradigm where you objectify and you could look at results, external results, so to speak, as products with patents and copyrights and ownership, which is symptomatic of the older economic view of resources and capitalism in every sense and so forth, to a different kind of tangibility. In other words, there are 2 kinds of ways to materialize or become tangible. And the Zen way, the yoga way, the Christ way, the Buddha way, the Aristotle Logos virtuoso way of ethics, all of these are saying that the awakened mind, the awakened culture, the awakened human being becomes tangible. She enters her body in a more tangible way. When you're an athlete in the zone, so to speak, the double bracket space and peak performance is tangible. So the tangibility of an awakened out of the cave person enters her body in yoga, in Zen, when it says when you chop wood, when you carry water, meaning that you are the event, you are the activity. You cannot dissociate from it, which is what the old culture does. So that in that sense of 2 models of tangibility for the 2 cultures, the one in the box, the one in the cave, the one in the old way, the old bottles, to the one, the genius out of the bottle, so to speak, into the light, to make manifest and tangible that embodied person, an embodied culture, and the logonomic practice is what we're looking at. And I think what Kingsley beautifully spoke of, about getting away from the same minds in the old ways to many minds. And imagine having the technology and the culture and the literacy to tap the wealth of the people, a common wealth of humans across borders on this planet, where the spontaneity of creativity, which is out of the bottle now, to think in new ways and to come up with mutations and adaptations and new ideas, if it could be a free open marketplace. So that when I publish my books, I would love to just make them be out in the market. I would love 1 billion people to steal it and plagiarize it and take it. And flow with it and begin to get the literacy of the double brackets. Because this technology of the double brackets needs to go viral. It needs to be in that entrepreneurial spirit, in the philanthropy, double bracket philanthropy, in the way Lynn Twist will speak about the soul of money and real philanthropy, in the sense is to make it open to the people, to the democratization of wealth and open access and transparency. This is the kind of the industrial future of many minds coming together in the marketplace of democracy. In synergy is a key word. Double bracket synergy is the communion of human energy co-creatively together. the culture of co-creation, interactive, interconnectivity in the Akashic field, when we discover the I-thou way of being together rather than the competitive way, imagine what will come. David.
I would like to just ask you to further that, if I may. We're talking tangibility. We have used the phrase open source, and I look at the definitions that you have used: philanthropists, entrepreneurs. There are those who are subjected by austerity measures. Could we not talk or refer to all of those individuals, all of us as preneurs? So you have philanthropists, which are preneurs, you have entrepreneurs, you have austerity-preneurs. Could it not be that everybody now becomes involved with this, where through a delicate, very delicate reduction of regulation by governments, a more open source for all to be involved in this and the way that you defined it? Could not everybody be involved in this, as you say?
That's beautiful. That's beautifully framed, David. And it has to be this way. That's what the marketplace of the liberated people, we the people, are all preneurs, entrepreneurs, all kinds of preneurs, and the truly double bracket laissez-faire open marketplace where human creativity is now out of the box and unbound. That is our legacy. That is a democratization of enlightened life and the dignity of each individual to tap our creative source. Because when we realize, as Blake saw, there's infinity in a grain of sand, and the Quakers saw there's infinity in a grain of man, every human being is tapping this Om field, this Buddha field, this Christ field, this Tao field, the Allah field, whatever script you use. When you realize the power that is within us, if we could find that interface with the infinite presence within, which is what the script gives us, we realize that the mass movement, the viral movement, yet to happen. The American Revolution, for example, is yet to happen. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, all cultures. What is the true revolution facing us in our evolutionary drama? It is to come out of the oppression of the adolescent script that keeps us in the cave of our adolescent human species. And that to be the ultimate entrepreneurship is self-activation, self-awakening. Even your mother or father can't do it for you. Each person has to say, I am, for herself, which is the birthright of coming into this awakened space. This is the entrepreneurship of self-creation that I think is the key. So imagine someone asked me at a global town meeting, feeling all desperate that we're not getting anywhere, hitting our heads against the walls in our activism. If only Gandhi were here, one person said, and we could have a salt march to electrify the people to come out together. And we need a salt march now. And I was leading this conversation in a global town meeting in Philadelphia, the birthplace of our nation. And after a moment silent, I looked up and said, Gandhi is here on the salt march of our time to call our people together out of our tribal ways into our global humanity, is to call an ego strike, a single bracket strike for one day, to set it aside, step back and realize I do not have to be addicted to that level of mental processing. And that would be the ultimate entrepreneurial liberation into the logonomic culture that awaits us. David.
Very finally, before I return to Kingsley, you mentioned we the people. When I look at the Declaration of Independence, I read those wonderful publications around that time, and I look at Thomas Jefferson. It was clearly to me a spiritual bound exercise more than it was some type of formation of a society. And that spirituality is talking about self-creation and was talking about self-creation in regards to we the people. So in many ways, I believe that you're also placing into context here that we are today in this conversation applying this to the original intent of those declarations as well. Perhaps there's great context there.
Absolutely, David. I think that's correct. That's a very good point to bring out. And I would go back even farther, of course, to the founding of our great traditions, the Judaic tradition, when Abraham had to listen to the call of Yahweh to put Yahweh first and love Yahweh with all you've got, mind, body, spirit. And he had to face the crisis of letting go of Isaac, a symbolic representation of his own ego-based self and agenda. Do we place our ego agendas above the call of the unified Akashic, fundamental, sacred space of the source of all of our resources and our evolution and the funding as human beings? That call is echoed in Jesus, who's calling us. I am the way, I am the script. You can't write it in stone, so to speak. You've got to live the law of love. You've got to come into the I thou and realize, when I was in prison, you visited me, and when I was hungry, you fed me. This is the I thou interconnective culture. And the Krishna advice to Arjuna in the Gita about moving into the technology of the yoga, awakened Atman, that Gandhi embodied as a Mahatma in trying to move India. And the revolution, the American Revolution language, you're right, with the Quaker influence here in Philadelphia and my own college, Haverford, founded by the Quakers, from Fox to William Penn to Rufus Jones, a Quaker mystic who founded philosophy at Haverford College, to Douglas Thier. And now I seek to hold that space open, to keep that double bracket. Friends of Truth, the Quakers are Friends of Truth, the Society was all part of the founding of the American dream. And that call of we the people, David, in order to found a more perfect community and so forth, all of that language, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all, the right to liberty, pursuit of happiness, that language is all the call to a double bracket America. And when Martin Luther King said in his speech, I have a dream, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the other side, I may not get there with you, but it's coming. I think he's foreseeing this unfinished American Revolution, the seeds of this culture into the new bottle, out of the cave, into the awakened non-tribal script. David.
Kingsley, we talked to this in our own program that we initially recorded. We're talking about self-creation. We're talking about maybe this new term, preneurs, that you're appointing to philanthropists, entrepreneurs, austeritypreneurs. You could even appoint that to advocacypreneurs. This is wide-ranging. Your thoughts and response to Ashok and to those ideas?
Well, there's so much to say on this conversation, David, and I'm so indebted to yourself and to Ashok for bringing this out. And I too, I really resonate with this idea of preneur and putting it in another context. And when I first heard that, my initial response was to think of the term flaneur. Flaneur was a sociological term at the turn of the century for those people who strolled idly down the street and looking around them. Well, we are not flaneurs anymore. We cannot afford to be strolling gazers. We are preneurs. We are actionist preneurs. And this term, preneur, should embody a sense of participation. And what Ashok so wonderfully framed as the viral movement. This is what really needs to take place. And if I can go back to something which Ashok was talking about slightly before, talking about the local. And he's totally correct in saying that the local is global, but not in the old terminology, in the sense that horrible term globalization that was used in the 80s to sense that, yes, we are local, but we act globally. But the local should flourish. And as Ashok rightly said, there is no break between what we do locally in the global world. It is that butterfly effect. But this local flourishing, if that can engage with this self-creation, engage with this open source perspective. Now, think about even 15 years ago, we weren't not using this term open source. It didn't exist. And now we have open source ecology, movements who are designing machinery and tractors, and then distributing this information free on the internet for people to take without patents, to then develop this technology themselves. This is what the commonwealth is. It's wealth distributed between commonality between all classes, all people, in all contexts. Now, this is a new vocabulary. It's not the commonwealth of the empire. That's one word, commonwealth. It wasn't our wealth. Our wealth is commonwealth. And that's what catalyzes the self-creation. So if we can tie this in to again manufacturing production that can happen on a local scale, it can help to flourish local communities and give a sense of participation. Now, for me, that's very important to get away from this malaise, this negativity of the world. The world is fragmenting, and we just should go into reaction, aversion, separate cocoons. No, it's a time to stimulate us into increased participation, and the sense that although we act in locally and should flourish locally, the information can always be shared globally. We have these networks at our fingertips, as long as our access to the internet continues. But it should embolden our local projects, and not the other way around. And so, like I say, this preneurship, austerity-preneurs, well, austerity obviously has a negative connotation, but that can catalyze us into finding innovative solutions that the communities can develop. I know, for example, there's talks in Greece of we may call them austerity-preneurs, but many local manufacturers are now distributing their produce direct to consumers locally and bypassing the middle brokerage. They are finding ways around this. That's maybe called austerity capitalism. So these situations should be catalyzing opportunities, and self-creation is important because whereas before, where our industrial models have fostered a dependency that we can sit in our homes and go to the supermarket out of town and buy everything we need, or etc. We need to move away from this and feel that we need to nurture self-creation and interdependencies. The intranet that Ashok talked about, and open source is a vocabulary and is a means of doing that. But I don't have all the answers. The answers can come from the millions of minds. People who can develop solutions and distribute and send on in their viral pathways their solutions. And by adding to solutions, we create exponential projects. If we go through the old industrial model, the vertical top-down, we have a linear model of development. But the linear model is an old model, and that's not going to work now. We need to go to a non-linear exponential model. That exponential model is the preneurs, the open source, the self-creation. And I feel that we are going to witness some great developments in the next decade as millions or more people start to tap into this exponential participation, David.
Ashok, your response to that, if you may, it seems that we're talking about preneurs as being appointed to all of those descriptions today. And we're also talking about a fully horizontal, vertical environment, that linear model now dissipating very quickly.
Yes, thank you, David. I really continue to appreciate Kingsley's brilliant remarks, connecting dots that so need to be connected. Just starting with the idea of linear and not losing sight of the first points that we're raising about capitalizing opportunities on austerity and so forth. I think it's important to get clear on what linear means. I think in the general public, people may not understand. They hear it over and over. Linear is a metaphor for a way of thinking and using our minds that we're calling single bracket or ego mental. What's linear about it? Well, when you are using a way of life across the planet, this has been seen, and that's a stage of our adolescent development. It's very natural to talk about the world, to talk about my experiences. I'm hungry, I am thirsty, the sun is shining, grass is green, America is a democracy, whatever the information in the box. And using the principle of identity, philosophers and logicians understood that the naive principle of identity is that A is A. When you use a word, it has a name tag for one item, and that item is in its own box, and everything has an atomic mind bite and an existential independence, allegedly like an atom. And when you live in that script, everything you name. Space is different from time, is different from cause, is different from a subject upon which we think. Everything, every person with her name is a separate atom living independently. And when we have our experience in that space, using the ego-mental calculus of the mind, we have an ego-mental lifestyle, ego-mental economy, the capitalism, the individual rights model. It's all coming from that identity principle. And this is what our great teachers saw was a deadly principle if naively taken, because it can separate you from source. That's what holds us in the box. The fall of humans, in the biblical terms, from grace of connectivity, of being in the source and in the fund that funds our life, that disconnect is fatal and deadly. The fall into sin, in Eastern thought is called samsara, when you're in a cycle of birth and death, being an entity in the linear world that keeps recycling ad infinitum. The whole point of yoga and Buddha's diagnosis in medical was to take us to another level, to break that habit. It's an addiction to linear. And so to mature, which is a huge rite of passage for the planet, awaits, that our great teachers have been modeling and teaching. How do you shed the old way, the old bottle, the old culture, the old script that keeps us in the cave, and walk into the light, as Socrates would say, is a journey of philosophy and wisdom. That is the ultimate activism and self-authoring that we're referring to, the self-creation. To say I am is to step into the light and be willing to shed the old limited calculus of the mind and life form, to move and cross into this source space. So it's not only making available this open source economy of openly sharing in that logonomic culture and ethics. The honor code of the logonomic culture is commonwealth. Commonwealth, not one word, as Kingsley rightly pointed out. I live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And only in the last 10 years it struck me what that meant, commonwealth, the common ground, the commons of humans. There is the commons in one sense where we meet out in the civic space, which is important. But the other commons is the common ground, the source, the Om sphere, the Logos sphere, the Akashic sphere, the Christ space, the Buddha space. That is our commons, and that is our heritage, to self-activate in self-creation and to step forth in this new culture that awaits us. David.
Kingsley, your final response to that?
Well, Ashok has again put a so fine a point on it when he said the commons is our heritage. We're almost going around full circle now, that we have to go back to the commons, a sense of our shared space, our shared commonality, the Logos mind. But we have to manifest this in action and behavior and thoughts. We have to manifest it as a model where we can take the world forward and our participation in the world away from what I should call the ego mental economy. So if this model that we've been talking about, this self-creation preneur model, if this can truly manifest and emerge, then this can be part of the holistic, the whole holistic phenomena, the whole holistic realm and dimension of connecting again, not only connecting in humanity, in our brotherhood and our connecting to source, but also connecting in a planetary sense. Now, we've talked about this as being where we feel and we share the way to move forward. This is a tangible model that is emerging, and I feel will start to be seen as a contending force that is coming from the periphery to become, let's say, a 21st century model. However, the question is, we're still working within a time perspective. You mentioned, David, about the old model dissipating quickly, or is the question dissipating quickly? This is something for me which is unsure, because these shifts in perspective, worldviews, do not happen overnight. They can take a matter of a generation or two. I'm hoping that we've witnessed in only the last few years a huge upsurge in connectivity, in civil movements, in a whole welfare and plethora of different mass activities of people coming together in a democratization for the future. My hope is that we will not have to wait too many generations for this open source, self-creation, participatory, non-ego mental model to come in. It is my hope that this integral ecological source perspective, commonality, will come in exponentially rather than the linear model that we've discussed. I feel that we still may see, before this comes about, we still may see the signs of disruption and fragmentation. That, in a sense, is inevitable. What's important to say is that these signs of fragmentation should be an encouraging sign, saying that this is happening because another birth is happening. The breakdown, we need to clean out the house. We need to clean out the weeds for new flowers to bloom. And so these are signs that we can engage in participating in bringing new forms into emergence, and not let ourselves be disheartened and demotivated by seeing the signs of what we may perceive as being collapse around us. It's very important that we take the reins of our own empowerment and find means of expressing our own participation in the years to come, because the years will be co-created through us, not be given to us by a top-down model, I hope, David.
We reached the end of our journey, gentlemen. Ashok Gangadeen, I will come to you, sir, first in our final statements. Today we have talked about preneurs, we have talked about open space and abundance and the true meaning of that. Your final thoughts in this part of our journey?
Well, thank you, David. And Kingsley, thank you so much for your wonderful insights. And Ervin, as ever, it's always wonderful to dance with you. And David, you hold the space beautifully. I must take a moment to thank you for the way you hold the space for dialogue and the searching questions and queries that you bring forth one upon the other in the spirit of a deepening, deep dialogue. I thank you for that. I think this is very conversation is modeling the kind of discourse that we're speaking about. And this is an important principle, because when you leave the linear, which you put it as a product separate from you, into the shift into the source logonomic way of living in the moment, in the Zen yogic Christ-like fashion of co-creativity and supreme activism. This is where real activism comes. I think the old model of activism is hitting the walls of its own script, and it doesn't yet see it, despite the great teachings for millennia of our great teachers, who were great activists and evolutionary elders, modeling the kind of culture that we're being called for. The question of timing that Kingsley remarked about, and Ervin raised it as well, when I, as a co-chair with Ervin, Laszlo in the World Wisdom Council, have meetings around the world on the question of the shift and the question of urgency and the crisis on a planetary scale, we realize that we don't have another century to kind of mosey along to come to this. There's something viral that must happen. The urgency of the crises in our face at every level, the nuclear threat, the water issues, the medical issues, the poverty issues, all of the many, every aspect we look at, political meltdown, broken civic spaces, failed democracy, all of these points have reached such a heightened point after millennia. It's not low. It's not just in the 20th century. This has been building for centuries. The holistic diagnosis and symptoms that we see. And so, as often said in these circles, the present generation, which includes all of us on the planet now, all age groups, this generation may be the first that will have a say as to whether we shall be the last generation. It's in our face, and emergence has become an emergency of activism and self-empowerment. It calls for an exponential viral ignition of what's been incendiary, waiting underground, waiting to ignite. And I feel very hopeful, David, that in the 11th hours when mutations ignite, it's on the threat of possible extinction and implosion that the most exciting and hopeful moments come. And I'm very hopeful at this, as we enter the 21st century, an unprecedented global age, and the democratization of the script, the democratization of our right to come into presence and coming into self-activated flourishing. It's upon us now, precisely because we have no choice. We must, in timely fashion, step forward together in synergy and co-creation of personal activism and self-activation and collective activation in order to move into the new form of life. Thank you, David.
And Kingsley, Dennis, your final impressions on this leg of our journey?
Well, David, thank you to you for bringing this conversation forth. And I'd like to say, whenever I listen to Ashok, I'm inspired myself. And I feel that I am inspired for the future, and I'm positive for the future. And it's all about coming together. Because when minds come together, they invigorate creative thought. They inspire. And I agree totally 100% with Ashok's phrase, the exponential viral ignition. That's a beautiful phrase. Exponential viral ignition. We need that ignition, and it's coming, and I feel that when it comes, we're going to see change at a rapid pace. Because we're already seeing change now in terms of certain systems breaking down rapidly. But out of the ashes of that, I feel that the innovation that will be inspired will also be a testament to human ingenuity. There's that phrase which I think I mentioned before that Doris Lessing used in her work, Shikasta, the SOWF, S-O-W-F, the substance of we feeling. And Doris Lessing has said that there was a time when human society had lost its substance of we feeling. And now it's a time to bring that together, to come together, and to, when it counts and when there is a need, that need fosters necessity for innovation and creative change. Again, quoting Rumi, the organs of perception coming to being when there's a necessity, therefore increase your necessity. We need new organs of perception, perspective, consciousness to come into being. So what we need to do, we need to increase our necessity. And our necessity is being forced upon us at this very moment, and we need to respond. And so, as Ashok rightly says, our response should be a step forward in synergy and self-activating ourselves. And I too feel that we will, as a collective race and species, and also individually, we will step up to this. It may be a shock at first. There may be some hurdles to cross. It may not be all joy. But that is part of our journey. And I feel that people listening to this, any comments and feedback is welcome. So I'd like to say that now's the time to step forward in synergy for self-activation. And I feel positive that these are the times that we can actually show ourselves as a collective species. And I look forward to seeing how these years will develop, and appreciative of this conversation. And I look forward to more ways of exploring this.
And finally, Ervin, Laszlo, your thoughts at the end of this journey, sir?
I think big changes are coming. It is not a question whether they are coming. It is not a question even whether we will change our own mindset. It's a question whether we will change in time before the outside world forces us. I think our activity now, our ambitions, our aspirations have to focus on creating a momentum for change from the inside. All these concepts that we have been discussing, whether it's abundance or holistic worldview, our sense of being one rather than having this duality, all the concept of stress, whether restabilizing or creating something new, all this is in flux now. Very, very encouraging factors, that things that we have been saying, at least the three of us who are being interviewed here, I think we have been saying for many years, and we considered somewhat of esoteric or outsiders or somewhat utopian or idealist kind of people. And these are coming in now, and people are recognizing that you have to pay attention to these factors. Change is really always revolutionary. Evolution is always a revolution. And what appears to be a monster today could be the main line of dominance tomorrow. This, in fact, is a term that biologists use, evolutionary biologists. They call the mutants that come about that will take over as a main species. But before they have the possibility of moving into the mainstream, while they are the periphery, they are called the hopeful monsters. So in a sense, I don't know if others on this program would like to agree with me that we are all hopeful monsters, but we're becoming recognized less as monsters, but more like kind of prophets. And this is a positive development. We sense it in our own experience. We have not yet won this race between timely change and change forced from the outside. But we have we increasingly entering this race. We have increasing chances of doing so. And if we can talk about it like we have been doing on this program, and if many of these programs get reproduced and people are have access to it, then I think a recognition will come about that we can indeed change, and then we will start to change. If we know we can, I think we will, because we will also know that we must. And that is basically my conclusion. In that sense, I'm cautiously optimistic. I have faith in the flexibility, in the dynamism, in the common sense, in the evolutionary common sense of humanity.
And that brings us to the end of this journey together, the 38th program in the series at Crossing Over the Bridge. And I would like to thank today Dr. Ervin Laszlo, Professor Ashok Gangadine, and Kingsley Dennis.
Well, yes, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful pleasure. I think I feel as a television host of my own program, Global Lens, David, the quality of this dialogue is enormous. And it's really, I feel it's taking us to the cutting edge, and to dance with people like yourself and Ervin and Kingsley is a wonderful blessing, really, and love to share this.
And Kingsley Dennis, thank you to you as well.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Ashok, because I come to these conversations half full because that's all I have. And when I listen to Ashok and Ervin and yourself, David, you catalyze me into bringing something forth. And that's a great pleasure to witness that. And I feel that that's how we all are. We catalyze each other. And so thank you for this opportunity.
And to our listeners today, I do hope that you enjoyed this journey and program as much as we. You can gain information on this and any other program in the series at the official website, davidgibbons.org or crossingoverthebridge.org. Meanwhile, wherever you are in this world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.